should trophy hunters be allowed to fund conservation efforts, sparks one of the most controversial ethical debates in modern wildlife management and environmental policy. In many countries across Africa, including Namibia, South Africa, and Zimbabwe, tightly regulated trophy hunting programs generate millions in conservation funding. Proponents argue that trophy hunters, paying tens of thousands of dollars to legally hunt iconic species like lions, elephants, and rhinos, provide critical financial support for conservation. This revenue funds anti-poaching patrols, habitat restoration projects, scientific research, and community development programs in areas where wildlife conservation struggles financially. In remote regions with limited tourism appeal, trophy hunting provides one of the few reliable revenue streams to incentivize wildlife protection. Without these funds, many protected areas would lack the resources needed to combat illegal poaching, manage habitats, and compensate local communities for wildlife conflict. Supporters claim that regulated hunting ensures only old, non-breeding animals are targeted, minimizing the ecological impact while maximizing financial return. By assigning high financial value to living wildlife, trophy hunting theoretically gives local communities an economic incentive to tolerate dangerous animals rather than killing them as pests. In regions where elephants trample crops, lions prey on livestock, or leopards threaten human safety, hunting revenue can offset losses and fund conflict mitigation. Some conservation organizations cautiously support regulated trophy hunting, arguing that when properly managed, it can play a pragmatic role in sustainable wildlife management. However, opponents argue that trophy hunting, even when legal and regulated, is ethically indefensible and undermines the core principles of conservation. Critics contend that killing rare, endangered, or charismatic species for sport sends a contradictory message, devaluing individual animal lives while claiming to protect species survival. They argue that conservation should be rooted in protecting animals as sentient beings with intrinsic value, not reducing them to financial assets in a blood-based economy. Many wildlife advocates see trophy hunting as a colonial relic, perpetuating a system where wealthy foreigners pay to kill animals in countries still grappling with post-colonial inequalities. The power dynamics of trophy hunting also raise ethical concerns, with wealthy hunters from industrialized nations dictating the fate of animals in poorer, biodiverse countries. This dynamic can erode local sovereignty, sidelining indigenous conservation practices in favor of profit-driven, foreign-controlled wildlife management. Even the scientific claims underpinning trophy hunting's conservation benefits are hotly debated, with conflicting data on whether hunting quotas are truly sustainable. In some cases, corruption, weak governance, and inadequate oversight allow hunting quotas to be inflated, leading to population declines even under regulated programs. Research also shows that killing dominant males, especially in species like lions, can disrupt social structures, trigger increased infanticide, and destabilize prides or herds. Opponents question whether alternative, non-lethal revenue sources like ecotourism, carbon credits, or community-based conservation can fully replace hunting revenue. They argue that ethical, wildlife-centered economies should prioritize coexistence strategies that preserve animal lives while supporting human development. In regions with strong tourism infrastructure, wildlife viewing safaris can generate significantly more revenue over time than a single hunting permit. However, in remote or politically unstable areas where tourism is impractical, hunting remains one of the few revenue streams available for conservation funding. The ethical dilemma hinges on whether it's morally justifiable to sacrifice individual animals, often the largest, most iconic specimens, to finance protection for the species as a whole. Some ethicists call this conservation triage, where conservationists must weigh the life of a single animal against the survival of an entire population. This utilitarian approach, while pragmatic, clashes with growing recognition of individual animal rights and the intrinsic worth of all sentient beings. Public opinion also plays a major role, with high-profile trophy hunts, like the killing of Cecil the lion, sparking global outrage and calls for bans. The emotional response to charismatic animals killed for sport reflects a broader cultural shift toward valuing animals as individuals, not just ecological units. Some countries, including Kenya and Botswana, have banned trophy hunting altogether, prioritizing non-lethal conservation models rooted in community stewardship and ecotourism. However, these models depend heavily on political stability, international tourism demand, and reliable funding, all vulnerable to economic shocks or geopolitical crises. Supporters of trophy hunting argue that idealistic alternatives, while appealing, fail to address the immediate funding needs of under-resourced conservation programs. They contend that in areas where hunting bans led to funding gaps, poaching increased and community tolerance for wildlife decreased, harming both animals and ecosystems. The debate also highlights the cultural divide between Western animal rights ethics, emphasizing individual welfare, and African conservation pragmatism, focused on balancing species survival with local economic realities. Many African conservationists argue that communities living alongside dangerous wildlife should have the right to decide whether sustainable hunting plays a role in their economic and ecological future. They caution against imposing Western moral frameworks that ignore the complex realities of poverty, food insecurity, and human-wildlife conflict in many rural communities. At the heart of the debate is whether conservation should prioritize species-level survival, individual animal rights, or the economic well-being of human communities. Some conservationists advocate for compassionate conservation, a philosophy rejecting all intentional killing of wildlife, even for scientific research or population control. Compassionate conservationists argue that valuing animal lives as individuals fosters deeper cultural respect for wildlife and reduces the risk of commodification. However, critics argue that compassionate conservation offers few realistic solutions for funding vast protected areas or compensating communities for living with dangerous species. The ethical debate surrounding trophy hunting reflects deeper questions about humanity's relationship with nature, whether we are caretakers, exploiters, or participants in ecological systems. As climate change, habitat loss, and poaching accelerate species decline, the pressure to fund effective conservation grows, sometimes at odds with ethical ideals. Whether trophy hunting remains part of future conservation models will depend on whether non-lethal alternatives can reliably fund long-term habitat protection and community engagement. The future of conservation may ultimately depend on finding ethical solutions that respect both human needs and animal lives, bridging the gap between moral principle and ecological pragmatism. The question remains, is trophy hunting a necessary evil in a flawed world, or a betrayal of conservation's core purpose in valuing life itself?